She fired me from my own company, in front of the entire board. Everyone laughed, thinking I'd finally lost my edge, until they realized I'd been 10 steps ahead the whole time. Hey folks, before I tell you how my wife turned my success into her power trip, make sure to subscribe, drop a like, and tell me in the comments if you've ever watched someone mistake kindness for weakness. You'll want to hear this. 1.16 years. That's how long I built Harper Steelworks from a dusty garage into one of the top regional suppliers in the Midwest. And all that time, my wife, Clara, played the part of the perfect partner. Sharp, supportive, always there with coffee during late nights, always telling people, "It's our company." I believed her. Every contract I signed, every deal I closed, I told myself it was for us. The morning it all began, the air in the boardroom was heavy. You could feel the tension bouncing off the glass walls. I was presenting our new expansion plan to investors when I noticed the looks. Those quick glances between Clara and our CFO, Michael, the same guy I'd brought in fresh out of college 10 years ago. My gut told me something was off, but I brushed it aside. Clara smiled at me the way she always did when she wanted to hide something. After the meeting, she asked if I could stay late for an important discussion. I thought it was about the new plant or maybe the loan paperwork. Instead, she waited until the entire board had gathered again. Lawyers, assistants, even the junior managers who barely knew how to read a quarterly report. Then she stood up and said words that still echo in my head. Effective immediately, the board has decided to terminate your position as CEO. At first, I laughed, thought it was some cruel joke. But then she slid a folder across the table. Company charter, her signature, board votes. All neat and legal. "You're burning out, Tom," she said softly. "It's time to let someone else take over." Someone else. Meaning her. I remember the silence after that. Tight, humiliating. Nobody met my eyes. Michael just cleared his throat and started talking about strategic redirection. I looked at Clara, my wife of 20 years, and she couldn't even hold my gaze. When it was over, I walked out of that boardroom like a ghost. Everyone avoided me, except the janitor who muttered, "Sorry, Mr. Harper," as I passed. I didn't answer. I just kept walking until I reached the parking lot, sat in my truck, and stared at my reflection in the windshield. My face looked calm, but inside I could feel something sharp forming, something that wasn't anger, not yet. Just a cold, precise awareness. That night, Clara came home acting like nothing had happened. She poured herself wine, turned on the fireplace, and said, "You'll thank me someday. You've been running yourself into the ground." I watched her talk about our future while wearing the same expression she used in front of the board, confident, polished, untouchable. That I realized then that this wasn't a sudden decision. She'd been planning it for months, maybe years, and I'd been too busy building an empire to see her quietly moving pieces in a place that I didn't argue, didn't yell. I just nodded, poured myself a drink, and said, "You're right. Maybe I do need a break." Inside, a single thought settled in. If she thinks she took everything from me, she's about to learn what everything really means. That was the night I stopped being her partner and started becoming her reckoning. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in the dim light of my office, staring at the framed photos of Clara and me from our early years, back when everything felt like teamwork, not a silent competition. I kept hearing her voice in that boardroom, calm and professional, as if she were reading a press release instead of cutting her husband's throat in public. The next morning, while she slept upstairs, I opened my laptop and started working on something I hadn't touched in years, an old side project, a small subsidiary company I'd registered under a holding name before Harper Steelworks even took off. Nobody remembered it existed. I'd created it back when I was doing freelance steel fabrication, just in case I ever needed a safety net. That morning, it became my escape hatch. I called it Harper Industrial Design, but the paperwork listed a different owner, an alias, a shell I'd set up to test some patents that never went to production. Clara never knew about it, because back then she didn't care about my early struggles. She only got interested after the money started rolling in. I started moving quietly. First, I met with our old plant manager, Gary, a tough man with calloused hands and a simple rule: never trust anyone who doesn't know the smell of iron. He'd been loyal to me since day one. When I told him what happened, he didn't say much, just nodded and said, "Tell me when it's time." I told him soon. Over the next few weeks, while Clara celebrated her new leadership with photos and interviews, I was busy redirecting contracts. The small suppliers we'd outgrown years ago were more than happy to work with me again. I promised them better terms and faster payments. They didn't care what name was on the paperwork, as long as the checks cleared at home. Clara acted as if she'd done me a favor. She started dressing differently, sharper, colder, more expensive. She'd come home late, talking about meetings and dinners with potential investors. I played along, smiled when she told stories about being praised as a visionary, pretended I was proud. Inside, I was mapping every weakness she didn't know she had. The factory lease, for instance, was still under my name. The patents she thought she owned were actually registered through a private trust I'd created to protect intellectual property from hostile takeovers. That trust was still active. She didn't even realize it. A month later, I visited our attorney under the pretense of revising estate documents. I made sure to clarify a few technical details about intellectual property rights. The lawyer, an older gentleman named Briggs, looked over the paperwork and gave a quiet whistle. "Tom, you understand what this means? She can't sell or license any of your designs without your consent." I nodded. "Good," I said. "Let's keep it that way." Every night, I watched Clara rehearsing her speeches, practicing in front of the mirror about how she'd inherited a legacy and transformed it for the future. She loved that phrase, legacy. She used it like a trophy. Meanwhile, my legacy was rebuilding itself, quietly, methodically, under a different name. One Friday evening, she hosted a party at our house to celebrate the company's new direction. The same people who'd voted to remove me were there, sipping wine and congratulating her. I stayed in the corner, silent, smiling when someone spoke to me, but saying little. I noticed Michael hovering near her, laughing too loudly at her jokes, leaning too close. It didn't surprise me. Betrayal rarely travels alone. At one point, Clara clinked her glass and said, "To new beginnings, and to leaving behind what holds us back." The crowd cheered. I just raised my glass and whispered, "To endings," under my breath. That night, after everyone left, I walked into the empty kitchen and saw the pile of used glasses and the wine stains on the marble counter. The house felt hollow, like it already belonged to someone else. Clara appeared in the doorway, her heels clicking softly. "You were quiet tonight," she said. "Maybe it's time you find something new to do." I looked at her and said, "Already did." She smiled, thinking I was joking, and walked away. The next morning, I transferred the final set of contracts to my new company's account. Harper Industrial Design now had 6 clients, 3 suppliers, and a warehouse leased under my holding name in Indiana. It was small, but it was mine in every way she could never touch. I stood in that empty warehouse the following week, the air thick with the scent of oil and steel, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to peace, but peace was temporary. Because while I was rebuilding quietly, Clara was about to make her biggest mistake yet, one that would turn my silent preparation into a storm she'd never forget. It started with a phone call from one of my oldest clients, a man named Richard Lowe, owner of a construction firm that had been buying steel from me since the garage days. His voice carried that same nervous tone I'd heard only once before, when he was about to cancel a major deal during the recession. "Tom," he said, "your wife just tried to renegotiate our contract." I paused, waiting for the rest. She wanted to raise prices by 20% and push delivery out by 6 months. Said you were no longer involved, and she's taking the company in a new direction. I told her we had a standing agreement, signed by you personally. She said that agreement is void. I took a breath, kept my tone calm. "And what did you tell her?" He chuckled. "I told her I'd rather melt my own rebar than deal with her again. But I thought you should know." I thanked him and hung up. That was the moment I realized Clara wasn't just trying to erase me. She was about to destroy the company that bore my name. Over the next few weeks, rumors started circulating. Suppliers complaining of delayed payments, clients losing confidence, investors pulling out. Clara's arrogance had blinded her. She thought the name Harper Steelworks was enough to keep the business running without understanding that it wasn't the name that kept those contracts alive. It was the trust people had in me. And that trust was shifting fast. My phone buzzed day and night as old partners started reaching out quietly, asking if I'd ever consider working with them again. I said maybe, and gave them my new number, one that wasn't tied to Harper Steelworks but to Harper Industrial Design. At home, Clara was unraveling. though she hid it behind the same polished smile she used in interviews. She'd come home late, drop her purse on the counter, and pour herself a drink before saying, "We're just going through growing pains." I'd nod, pretending I believed her. But behind her back, I was meeting with people she thought she'd bought loyalty from. People who'd seen enough of her leadership to want out. Point one night, Michael showed up at the house while she was in the shower. He looked nervous, wouldn't meet my eyes. "Tom, I didn't know she'd go this far," he said. "She's moving money between accounts, hiding losses from the board." I stayed silent, watching him fidget. "She's trying to cover it by inflating contract numbers. She's desperate." I leaned back in my chair and asked, "Why are you telling me this?" He sighed. "Because I don't want to go down with her. She thinks she can fix it, but she's burning through reserves faster than you can imagine." He handed me a flash drive and left without another word. That night, I plugged it in and stared at the data. It was worse than I expected. Falsified invoices, backdated signatures, personal expenses logged as company costs. She wasn't just reckless. She was criminally reckless. I sat there for a long time, thinking about the woman who once shared late-night takeout with me while we dreamed about expanding into new markets. Somewhere along the line, ambition had turned into vanity and partnership into power. The next morning, I drove to the plant and met Gary. We sat in his cramped office, surrounded by old blueprints and coffee cups. "You sure about this?" he asked. I nodded. "It's time." That afternoon, we began transferring the last remaining pieces of equipment under new contracts. Everything was legal, all above board. Clara had let several leases expire without renewal, too busy managing her image to manage her infrastructure. So when the equipment disappeared, it wasn't theft, it was business. 2 weeks later, Harper Steelworks failed to deliver on 3 major contracts. Clients pulled out, lawsuits were threatened, and the board called an emergency meeting. Clara didn't know I was in town that day, sitting quietly in the back of the conference room when she walked in. Her face went pale for half a second before she composed herself. "Tom," she said smoothly, "didn't expect to see you." I nodded. I figured I should witness what's left of my legacy. The meeting turned into chaos as the CFO presented the financial statements. Losses were staggering. Michael kept his eyes down the whole time. Clara tried to spin it, blaming the economy, supply chain issues, anything she could think of. But the numbers spoke louder than her excuses. When the meeting ended, she cornered me in the hallway. "You think this makes you look strong?" she hissed. "You're destroying everything we built." I met her glare. "You destroyed it the moment you decided it was yours alone." She looked like she wanted to slap me, but stopped herself. "You can't just walk away from this," she said. "You'll go down too." I smiled faintly. "You should probably check who actually owns the patents before you say that." I left her standing there, speechless, as I walked toward the exit. That evening, I got a call from one of the board members. "Tom," he said carefully, "is it true you hold the rights to the machinery designs and production algorithms?" "It's true," I said. "And Harper Industrial Design is the exclusive license holder now." There was silence on the line, then a slow exhale. "In that case, I suppose we'll be doing business with you again soon." I hung up and sat in my truck watching the factory lights flicker in the distance. I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. What I felt was something deeper, a sense of final reckoning building just beneath the surface. Clara still had one move left, and I knew she'd use it. What I didn't know was how far she'd go to try to take me down with her. 2 weeks passed before the final act began. I was in my new office at Harper Industrial Design, reviewing a shipment schedule, when my assistant buzzed through the intercom. "There's a woman here asking for you," she said. "Won't give her name, but she says it's urgent." I already knew who it was before I stepped out into the lobby. Clara stood there, perfectly dressed as always, but her confidence was gone. Her hair was pinned back hastily, her eyes red from lack of sleep. "We need to talk," she said quietly. I motioned toward the conference room. She sat down, trying to compose herself while I poured 2 glasses of water. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then she said it, voice trembling. "They're investigating me." I didn't pretend to be surprised. "Fraud, embezzlement, falsifying financial reports." "That about right." Her lips tightened. "You knew this was coming?" I nodded once. "You brought it on yourself." She slammed her palm on the table. "Don't act like you're innocent in this, Tom. You set me up." I met her gaze evenly. "No, Clara. I just stopped protecting you." She looked like she might break. "I made a mistake, all right? I got scared. The investors were pressuring me. The board was doubting me, and I didn't know what else to do. I leaned back, studying her. You didn't get scared, Clara. You got greedy. You couldn't stand the idea that I built something you couldn't control, so you tore it apart to prove you could. And now here we are. She buried her face in her hands for a moment before whispering, I could lose everything. I said nothing. After a while, she looked up again, eyes glistening. Tom, please. You could fix this. You still have influence with the suppliers. You could tell them to hold off, buy me some time. I stared at her in silence, remembering that night in the boardroom when she'd said I was burning out, when she took everything and didn't look back. Finally, I said, why would I do that? Her voice cracked. Because I loved you. Because we built this together. I shook my head. You loved the company, not me. And we didn't build it together. You just happened to be standing next to me while I did. She flinched like the words hit her physically. You're cruel, she whispered. No, I said quietly. I'm honest. Cruel was what you did in front of the board when you stripped me of my title and called it mercy. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the factory yard where my team was loading steel shipments, steady, organized, alive. You called me dead weight back then. Now you're the one sinking. She rose from her chair, desperation finally bleeding through the last of her composure. If I go down, I'll take you with me, she said, voice trembling. I turned back to her slowly. You can try, but everything you're standing on isn't yours anymore. The patents, the designs, even the name, Harper Steelworks, will vanish the moment the investigation closes. You see, when you took me off the board, you violated the founder's clause in the original incorporation documents. The clause that says if the founder is removed without cause, all intellectual property reverts to the founder. You signed it yourself 20 years ago. She stared at me like she didn't understand the language I was speaking. You're lying. I opened a folder on the table and slid it toward her. Read it. My lawyer already filed the paperwork. By next week, every asset tied to Harper Steelworks will be frozen pending review. She picked up the papers with shaking hands, scanning the text. Her breath hitched. You planned this. I met her eyes. No, you did. I just finished what you started. She sank back into her chair, looking suddenly small. What happens to me? She asked quietly. That depends on what you tell the investigators. If you're honest, maybe they'll go easy on you. If not, you'll find out what it feels like to lose everything twice. For a long time, she just sat there, staring at the papers, her fingers trembling. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the sound of laughter in that boardroom when she'd humiliated me, and any trace of pity vanished. She stood finally, gathering her purse, her voice hollow. You'll regret this. I smiled faintly. I already did once. Not anymore. She walked out without looking back. Through the glass walls, I watched her cross the parking lot, her posture stiff, her heels echoing like small cracks in stone. The next week, the news broke. Former CEO under investigation for corporate misconduct. Her photo was on every business feed, the headline neatly cutting through what was left of her reputation. Investors pulled out entirely, and Harper Steelworks filed for bankruptcy within a month. I didn't celebrate. I just kept working. Harper Industrial Design expanded, absorbing most of the old contracts within 6 months. We hired back the same men and women she'd laid off, rebuilt the plant under a new name, new systems, and for the first time in years, the air inside that factory felt honest again. About a year later, I ran into Michael at a trade convention in Chicago. He looked older, worn out. You really did it, he said, almost with admiration. She's living out west somewhere, teaching business ethics at a community college. I laughed softly at the irony. Good for her, I said. Everyone needs a second chance. He studied me for a moment. You ever think about calling her? No, I said simply. There's nothing left to say. These days I keep a framed photo of the old Harper Steelworks sign in my office. Not as a reminder of what I lost, but of what I learned. People think revenge is loud, but they're wrong. Real revenge is quiet. It's success built in silence while the ones who betrayed you drown in their own noise. I never raised my voice, never sought public payback. I just built something stronger. And in the end, she taught me the most valuable lesson of all. Never confuse loyalty with ownership. So if you've ever been underestimated, betrayed, or replaced, remember this. Silence isn't weakness. It's preparation. Thanks for listening to my story. If you enjoyed it, make sure to subscribe, hit like, and tell me in the comments what moment you'd call your turning point. I'll be reading every one.